Welcome to Entry Point Faith. Join us each week to discover fresh meaning in the world and find faith your way. Now, here is Pastor Nancy Lafferty.
Hi, welcome back. I'm Nancy, and I am talking with Terry Tucker today. Terry, like many of us, you have endured a harrowing physical experience. And without going into a ton of detail, give us the share a little bit of this incredibly difficult journey that you have endured with us, please.
Sure. Well, first of all, Nancy, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today. I've been battling a rare form of cancer, a rare form of melanoma, since 2012. So 10 years, almost 11 years now, if I make it to April. And this was a rare form of melanoma. It appeared on the bottom of my foot. It necessitated some surgery. It necessitated 5 years of being on a drug because at the time, melanoma was pretty much a death sentence. There was no type of treatment or cure that they could give me. So they put me on a drug to try to, as my oncologist used to say, kick the can down the road. That drug was called interferon. I took a weekly injection. The side effects of the interferon were that I had severe flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection. And I took that drug for 5 years. So imagine having the flu every week for 5 years. And as I said, it wasn't a cure. It was just we're trying to kick the can down the road. Eventually, the drug became too toxic to my body that I had to stop it. Cancer came back in the exact same place. That necessitated the amputation of my foot in 2018. Cancer continued to progress. 2020, I had my left leg amputated and also found out I had tumors in my lungs, which I'm still being treated for. So that kind of in a nutshell is what I've been through these last 10 years.
Well, I am also incredibly encouraged just by your smile. You are sitting there smiling with twinkling eyes, and I don't see that energy in a lot of people. So I know you've got some secrets and you've got some coping skills. I do have a couple questions just about what you went through. You know, saying that you had the flu, basically flu-like symptoms for 5 years. Did you know that was going to happen?
You know, I did. I didn't know anything about interferon at the time, but I was a basketball coach in Texas, and I had a player whose grandmother was on it for a liver disease. And so I went to her and I said, hey, what's it like? And she said, oh, I was only on it for 6 months. It wasn't any big deal, but here are the side effects. And so when I went back to my oncologist, you know, kind of with my chest puffed out, like, oh yeah, I can handle this. And she was like, okay, good. She said, because I want you to be on it for 5 years. I looked at her like, you're insane. There's absolutely no way I can have the flu for 2 to 3 days every week for 5 years. She was like, do the best you can. I mean, because the alternative was you're going to die. So
right.
It
so
was
you
like,
were playing a very, very weird game of would you rather? Would you rather have the flu for 5 years, or would you rather go ahead and die? And you chose, okay, I'll take the flu. But
yeah, I mean, I committed to, I'll do the best I can for as long as I can.
So that, I mean, you're talking, amputation and all the other things, but we all know what the flu feels like. So I just want to land on that a second. Having the flu for 5 years, did you get depressed?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there were times, you know, I've always said there's a big difference between living and not dying. And I really felt I was sort of in that not dying mode. And there were days, you know, I was so sick of being sick that I literally prayed to die. I mean, I was not contemplating suicide or anything like that, but I was like, look, God, this is not living. And so, you know what, just get me out of here. Take me out of here. I am not interested in going through this. But obviously he didn't. But what I think he did do was give me the strength to literally, I mean, I used to talk about winning the day. Sometimes winning the day was I have to get out of bed and I have to make it to the couch where I'm going to plant myself for the next, 8-10 hours, and then I'm going back to bed. So,
right, because you were up and out of the bed. So how did that happen? How did you go from, God, please take me out in the woods and shoot me? How did you go from that to What was there an epiphany moment? Was there or what, did it slowly creep up on you that something kind of miraculous was happening to you emotionally, even though not physically? What was the turn?
I don't know if there was one specific turn. I mean, there have been little incremental steps along the way. When I found out I had, tumors in my lungs and I had my leg amputated, about 8 months later, my oncologist showed me my CAT scans. And I have no medical background, so I don't really know how to read it, but I could kind of look like, well, that doesn't look like it should be there. I mean, I had fluid all around the pleural spaces of my lungs. I had these big tumors in my lung. I was coughing up, kind of this bloody green phlegm. And I remember looking at my oncologist and I was like, how was I alive? And he kind of got this smirk on his face, and kind of shook his head. And he's like, I don't know, which said to me that, God wasn't done with me yet. So when I die, how I die, where I die, I always say, kind of joke, way above my pay grade. So I don't spend a lot of time worrying about it. When it happens, it happens. I have planned my funeral. I've been to the church, been to the mortuary, been to the cemetery. It's all done. So you know what? I'm here for as long as he wants me to be here. So, I mean, that was one epiphany. The other epiphany was cancer tends to isolate you. It isolates you from your friends. It isolates you from your family. And in a way, it isolates you from yourself. And if you don't control your mind, if you're, you let your mind start to run away with you and all those demons start to enter, then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. And so I've always had a very strong faith. I was raised a Catholic. I am still a Catholic. My mother, used to plant things like, oh, you're having a bad day? Here, open that drawer. There's a rosary in there. Start saying the rosary and that kind of thing. So, I mean, I've just been incredibly lucky to have the right people around me that have said, okay, Terry, stop thinking about yourself. This is something that's bigger than you.
That is simply remarkable, Terry, that you, I am awed by your strength of your faith. Would you say that you are much stronger even now after having gone through this? You said God isn't finished with you yet. So what is God doing with you now?
Yeah, I wrote a book in 2020 and people were suggesting that I write a book. And, there's sort of that old joke that says when we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. So, God has never talked to me. But I think what God does is he puts people in our path that sort of make the same suggestion over and over and over. And if you're in tune to that, if you're smart enough, you'll pay attention to that. And so, God kept putting these people in my path and said, you should write a book. And I was like, I'm not an author. What do you mean write a book? Are you crazy? I can't possibly write a book. But I did. I wrote a book literally during the time I was healing from having my leg amputated and before I started chemotherapy for the tumors in my lungs. And I always say, it was written by me, but it was certainly inspired by something bigger. And, I do kind of joke. It's kind of like, God sort of, hey, dummy, I'm telling you to write a book, write the book. I'll be there for you. I'll tell you what to say. I'll tell you how to say it. And I mean, it's not, I always say it's working its way up to the New York Times bestsellers list. I only need to sell about 1 million more copies. So, but you don't know whose impact that book has on other people. You don't know who reads it and reaches out or doesn't reach out and just say, you know what, I learned something from that. So like I said, written by me, but inspired by something much greater than me.
Well, I am certain that people have been encouraged by your words, people who have walked your journey and others. Like I said, we all know flu-like symptoms. We don't all know the tragedy of amputation or cancer, but every single one of us can align with living with pain. And have you received any letters, any feedback from people who've read your book?
I have. People will reach out to me. The book is called Sustainable Excellence, the 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. And so people will, there's always one of the principles that resonates with the reader. Specifically, I mean, even with me, I wrote all 10 of them and I have one that resonates with me. So when people reach out, that's a good starting point with me, to say, hey, and they're not in any order, number 1 isn't any more important than number 7 or anything like that. And so when people reach out, there's always one, and it's a great starting point to to say, hey, let's talk about this. How did this impact your life? What can you tell me that, maybe I can learn from this, from your experience as well? So yeah, it's fun for me when people do that. I enjoy it. Obviously I've never had a baby in my life, but this is probably the closest I've ever come to creating something that I felt was mine. Although, like I said, I wrote it, but inspired by something much greater than me.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the book. So you skipped quickly past the book title. I'm going to say it. Sustainable Excellence, 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. So I want to land on a couple of those words. If I feel like I am a common and ordinary person, that my life is common and ordinary, I might pass your book up. Why did you choose those two words? Why do you think we have an uncommon and an extraordinary life? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it goes back, when I was a kid, we used to hear in religion class, God don't make no junk, and I'm not junk. You're not junk. The people listening to us are not junk. You are an incredible human being. And when I think about, we all have unique gifts and talents. You may be better at something than I am. I may be better at something than you are. And if you think about your life, and it's all about us. I mean, we're great about that. And I'm guilty of that from time to time too. But if you think about all the people who have ever been in the world and all the people who ever will be in the world, and you realize that you are so unique and so special that there's never been anybody like you and there never will be anybody like you, how can you not say you are an uncommon and extraordinary individual? And the fact that you're putting yourself down, you just don't realize the power, the energy, the grace, the love that you have within you that you can give to other people. And, I don't want people to think that, I've gone through all this stuff and I don't have bad days. I do. I have horrible days where, I go to treatment every 3 weeks. I'm there for an entire week. I get a couple weeks off. But while I'm there, I get down, I get depressed, I cry. I do all that stuff. And I'm 6'8", 230 pounds. So, hey, I am just an imperfect human being. But when I get in those places, I find that I am looking internally. It's, oh, Terry, woe is you, oh, life's terrible. Look what happened to you and all that. But I find a way to get out of that is to look externally. Like I said, go to the hospital. I can always find somebody who wants to sit down and talk or have a cup of coffee or, hey, how's it going today? Or so, whatever it is. Now, all of a sudden, I'm looking to help somebody else and I'm not looking at myself. I'm not looking inward. I'm looking outward. And my whole attitude, my whole mindset changes when I do that. So whenever I get into those places, and I do, I just look to help somebody on the outside.
That's beautiful. Have you had an impact on the medical personnel who've helped you? Have any of them come to you and said, you are an encouragement to me. You are an inspiration to me?
I have. And it's interesting you say that. I have a nurse that when I met this nurse, she's about 25 years old. She was already a nurse, but she was in training on the unit where I get my infusions. And about 8 months after that, she was taking care of me by herself. And she came into the room and she said, Terry, I've got a story I want to tell you, but I'm a little uncomfortable telling it to you. What do you say to that? And I was like, well, it sounds like it might be a fun story. I hope you do tell me. And, she was in and out doing her thing and helping me and stuff like that. And about 2 hours later, she came in, she sat down in the bed. She's like, all right, here's the deal. She said, when I first met you, she said, I was going to get out of nursing. She said, I had a good friend of mine die. I was in a really dark place. I talked to my parents. I was going to get out of nursing and I was going to go to work for Amazon. And she said, and then I see what you go through every day. You throw up, you shake, you just go through, as Winston Churchill used to say, if you're going through hell, keep going, when you're going through these difficult times. And she said, then I went back and I started to read about everything you've been through all these years. And she said, then I knew I was where I was supposed to be. Now, if she would have never told me that story, I would have had no idea that my life had a positive impact on her. So I always tell people, you have no idea. I don't care how bad your circumstances are. You don't know who's out there watching you that they would give anything they have just to walk for 5 minutes in your shoes. So be careful. There was a basketball coach at UCLA when I was growing up by the name of John Wooden, and he had a great quote, and it went like this: "A careful person I want to be, a little person follows me. I dare not go astray for fear they may go the same way." So you have no idea who would want to walk in your shoes despite how lousy you think your life might be.
That is a beautiful quotation from Mr. Wooden. He has inspired many, many people for sure. An incredibly wise man as well as an excellent coach. So let's go back to your book a second. You mentioned that you have a couple of favorite of the principles that you've written about. Tell me about your favorite principle.
Yeah, it's my favorite, and I'm almost ashamed to admit it because I've done it, and I'm not necessarily proud that I've done this over time. And the principle or the chapter is titled this: most people think with their fears and their insecurities instead of using their minds. And I know I've done that. I know I've been like, oh, I'd like to do this. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I'm not smart enough, or maybe I don't have enough knowledge, or what will people say about me if I fail? That's thinking with our fears and our insecurities. That's not thinking with our minds. And when I speak to groups, especially to young people, I always tell them, if there's something in your heart, something in your soul that you believe you're supposed to do, but it scares you, go ahead and do it. Because at the end of your life, the things you're going to regret are not going to be the things you did. They're going to be the things you didn't do. And by then it's going to be too late to go back and do them. So, I always it's like, just go for it. I mean, but we get into this, I've got to compare myself. Well, he's got more money than I do, or he's got a better job, or he drives a better car, or, so we start comparing ourselves, and it goes back to, no, you have your unique gifts and talents, and you're supposed to go on your journey. You're not supposed to go on their journey. Just be happy for them. They got $1 million. Good for them. Be happy that they have $1 million. And care about them, but understand that your journey is not their journey. At the end of our lives, we're not going to be judged on what other people say or did. We're going to be judged on what we said or we did or didn't do, as the case may be.
Absolutely. Go ahead and recap that principle one more time. State that principle for us, please.
So most people think with their fears and their insecurities instead of using their minds. And I think we've all done.
Well, what I like about that is that, I'm also a counselor. And one of the things I learned as I was being trained in counseling was that behind most of our emotions that cause us to get into trouble lies one emotion, and that is fear. Our anger is laced with fear. Our disappointment and our misbehaviors are laced with fear. So you have actually grabbed that driving force and kind of by the horns and talked about how that derails us. It derails our actual journey, doesn't it?
It really does, because, when I wrote the book, I always say it was a book born out of two conversations I had. And one was with a former player who had moved to Colorado, where my wife and I lived, with her fiance. And the four of us had dinner one night. And I remember saying to her after dinner, I'm really excited that you're living close and I can watch you find and live your purpose. And she got real quiet for a while. And then she looked at me and she said, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have absolutely no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth, using your unique gifts and talents, and living that reason.
Excellent. I was looking at your bio last night in preparing for this podcast, and I will tell you I'm going to buy your book because now I'm real excited about it.
Thank you.
But you mentioned that you want people to have a life of significance and a life of success. Talk about those two phrases, how they're alike and how they're different.
Yeah, absolutely. Sustainable Excellence is a book about success, about how we can become successful. And success is what we do for ourselves. We have a great job, we make a lot, whatever it is. Significance is not so much about us, but what we can do for other people. How do we make a difference in their life? Now, don't get me wrong. I think you can be successful and significant at the same time. I don't think they're mutually exclusive by any means at all. But, I've toyed with, I'm not anywhere near ready to, I've toyed with writing another book about significance, because I think it's incredibly important, especially today when we all get caught up in, it's all about me. What's in it for me? Otherwise, I'm not doing it. Who cares what's in it for you? Yeah, I mean, what did Mother Teresa say? Something about God didn't ask us to be successful. He asked us to be faithful. And part of being faithful, I think, is making a difference in other people's lives. Like I said, we all have unique gifts and talents. Why do you have to hoard that? Why can't you use those gifts and talents and make somebody else better, improve somebody else's life? I'm reading a book now about givers and takers, and just how you think that takers, people who get stuff, that they would be the most fulfilled, they would be the most successful. And in all honesty, the research says just the opposite, that it's the givers. And I think back on my own life, that we tend to think that we're born empty, and by being born empty, we spend our lives trying to fill ourselves up. We consume. I've got to have a great job, I got to make money, I've got to have a great family, I've got to have a car, I've got to have but I'm starting to think as I get older that maybe we're all born full, and our responsibility is to empty ourselves out, is to pour ourselves out, kind of like St. Paul said, to pour ourselves out in the betterment of ourselves, in the betterment of our world, and in the betterment of other people.
Beautifully said, Terry. You mentioned this basketball player who came to you and said, I don't know what my purpose is. Would you agree that many of us bump and roll through our lives, and then when encountered with that question, what is my purpose, we come up empty? We might not know. We might not have been attached to the notion that that's what our journey is about. What do you say to someone then who's 60 years old and says, Terry, I don't know what my purpose is. How am I supposed to find it? What's your answer?
I'd say Colonel Sanders didn't start Kentucky Fried Chicken until after he retired. So I'd say, your purpose may not be something you get in your 30s. And I think a lot of times we feel that our purpose has to be our job or our occupation. And it doesn't. Your job could be something over here that you do to pay the bills, but your purpose is to write, or to be a podcast host, or be a minister, or whatever it is that you feel is in your heart. And so people and I've seen this. I've seen people quit on themselves. It's hard. They go down the road and, I'm trying to figure it out. I don't know. Is this my purpose? It doesn't seem like it. Okay, I'll try this. Well, that's not my purpose. Okay, I'm 30 or 40 now. And it's like, you know what? This is hard. This is difficult. I'm just going to quit. And we're also great about, we just don't quit. Now we got to blame somebody. We've got to blame our parents or our boss or our station in life. When I found out I had cancer, people were like, well, who do you blame? Like, what do you mean, who do I blame? It's like, well, you have to blame somebody that you got cancer. I said, no, I don't blame anybody. And then when they find out I have a faith life, they're like, well, you must blame God. And I sort of joke with them. I'm like, no, I don't think God got up on a Tuesday morning, checked his to-do list and said, Terry Tucker, cancer today. I don't think that at all. But I really believe that, I did a podcast with a woman at Duke University last week, and we were talking about how there have been times when I felt abandoned by God, as going through this cancer. It's like, where are you? I am hurting. And she was like, maybe he was, like gold, maybe he was burning off the stuff that he needed to burn off so that you would be even more, again, talking about gold, not about me, more pure, a better quality of gold. And I'd never thought about it that way. And I thought, wow, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah, maybe he's refining me and making me a better person by going through this. It's just, like I said, boy, I tell you, those times where I was like, where are you? Come on.
Well, and I was going to ask you that. I was going to ask if you'd ever gotten mad at God.
I've gotten mad a lot. I've never said, why did you do this to me? A couple summers ago, I had all 88 genes that doctors either know of or suspect cause all different forms of cancer. And I have absolutely no mutations in any of my genes, which sort of begs the question, why did I get this disease? And I've asked my oncologist that, and my oncologist is like, I don't know why you got this disease. So I don't spend a lot of time worrying about things that I can't control. I've got it. I mean, it's, kind of eat me away a little bit, little bits and pieces at a time. But this is my journey now. This is my travels. And wherever this leads me, wherever it takes me, I really feel now, when we were talking about purpose, when I was young, it was about basketball. I ate, drank, and slept basketball. I got a scholarship to play basketball in college. When I was an adult, when I was, kind of moving into adulthood, my grandfather was a Chicago police officer. I wanted to follow in his footsteps. My dad was absolutely opposed to it, but that's a whole nother story. And now, as I'm, in all honesty, probably coming to the end of my life, I sort of feel my purpose is to put as much goodness, as much positivity, as much motivation, as much love back into the world as I can. So I guess the other thing I'd say about purpose is don't think it has to be one thing. I've found, at least in my life, that my purpose has changed as I've grown and developed.
Absolutely. And I want to come back to another beautiful statement that you made when you said sometimes when we feel alone and we're wondering where God is and we know that God is kind of there, we may not be able to touch base with God, but it is those people that God places in our lives. Do you have the full understanding and the full recognition that you are that person for many other people, that you are a source of encouragement for many others because of what you've endured?
I think sometimes, I had a nurse, another nurse. All my stories about nurse or basketball. So, you tell stories about what you know. And she asked me, she said, what was it like to have your foot amputated in 2018 and then your leg amputated in 2020? And I've told her, I said, it has not been easy. I am still learning how to walk again with a prosthetic. But what I told her is that, cancer can take all my physical faculties, but cancer can't touch my mind, it can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are, Nancy. That's who everybody who's listening to us is. And we spend so much time, especially, with cancer. You get chemotherapy, you lose your hair, your skin is blotchy, you're tired all the time. And you just think, I am nothing. I am absolutely nothing at all. And I've been there, I've absolutely felt that way. But this is just a vessel or a house or whatever you want to call it to house who we really are. So I'm not telling you don't go to the gym. I'm not telling you not to eat right. I'm not telling you watch your weight, don't smoke, all that stuff. I'm not telling you that. But what I am telling you is spend a little bit more time working on who you really are. And that's your heart, your mind, and your soul.
Right. You're talking about becoming very in touch with ourselves as a spiritual being instead of a physical one, because we live in a physical world. So there you are, you're a basketball player, and you have this horrible thing that happens to you that takes away the very thing that would allow you to play in the way that you grew up playing. And so your body betrayed you. And so you obviously got much more in touch with the spiritual part of you, which is who we are. We are spiritual beings with a body. We are not physical beings with a spirit. And so that is what I'm seeing oozing out of your eyes and your smile and your energy is that soul. That is, your soul is just alive. And so it's been incredibly great to talk with you today, Terry. I want to give you a chance to, so this is just a real basic question. Someone calls you up on the phone and says, Terry, I've got cancer. What's the next thing I should do?
Realize that you're so much more powerful than you ever thought you were. I mean, I've always believed that we have a breaking point, but it's been my experience from myself and from other people that breaking point is so much further down the road. Don't quit. Don't give up. I have a friend of mine who's a former Navy SEAL, and the SEALs talk about their 40% rule, which basically says if you're at the end of your rope, if you can't go on, if you're done, you're only at 40% of your maximum, and you still have another 60% left to give to yourself. So that's another thing when I get into those dark places that I remember that. It's like, no, you still have so much more. And you don't think you do because you feel so lousy, but it's just you get to a point where push through, take one more step. Okay. I was able to do that. And if you do that, if you can control your mind, and that is the biggest thing I guess I started out with something that I'll correct myself. I really think you need to control your mind because we all become what we think. So if you sit there and say, oh, woe is me, and this is terrible, and all that, you're going to hardwire yourself to say, yeah, my life is terrible, and there's nothing I can gain or nothing I can improve in terms of somebody else's life by my life. But that's absolutely not the case. You are absolutely so much bigger if you can control your mind, and you can do so much more if you just realize that, again, we all become what we think. So be very careful with that self-talk that we all have. We all talk to ourselves. Just make sure that self-talk is positive.
That is powerful advice, Terry. I thank you for being with us today. You have been a joy and a true inspiration to me, and I know to...
Well, thanks for having me, Nancy. I always say it's nice people like you that allow me to come on to their show and have a conversation with them. And if our conversation makes a positive difference in somebody's life, then today's been a good day.
Absolutely. I believe it will, and I believe it already has. So thank you for your time, Terry. It was wonderful to chat with you. I'm going to read your book.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Take care.
Thanks for listening in on this week's discussion on Entry Point Faith. You can join the Entry Point Faith community in person every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. at Conner Prairie in Fishers, Indiana. For more information and a transcript of Nancy's messages, visit entrypointonline.org. Entry Point Faith is brought to you in partnership with mypodcast.media.